July 22, 1944. As Soviet soldiers marched into a concentration camp in Poland, they were not prepared for the nightmare that awaited them. The gates swung open, revealing scenes that defied imagination. The air was thick with the stench of death, piles of children's shoes, mountains of human hair, and the unmistakable scent of burning flesh. Even the most hardened soldiers, battle-tested and unshaken by war, were physically sickened by the sight before them. But nothing compared to the true horror of the man behind this atrocity. Eric Muhsfeldt, a man responsible for crimes so vile they still echo through history. His brutality, including the mass burning of prisoners, men, women and children, would forever mark him as one of the darkest figures of World War II. And what happened to him in the end? Well, it's a punishment so fitting, it will leave your blood running cold. Before we get into the unimaginable crimes of Eric Muhsfeldt and the chilling justice that finally caught up with him, I need you to do something critical right now. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for Veil History. We're about to take you on a journey through the darkest corners of human history, exposing truths that most channels would never dare to touch. Don't forget to comment below with the name of the historical villain you think should be uncovered next. And please, share this video so these forgotten victims will never be erased from history. Now let's dive into the horrifying truth behind Eric Muhsfeldt and the atrocities he committed. As the Soviet forces advanced through German-occupied Poland, they had already witnessed countless atrocities. But what they discovered behind the gates of Maiden concentration camp was something beyond comprehension. The camp stood eerily silent, its machinery of death intact, frozen in time like a grotesque museum. This moment would mark the beginning of the end for the Nazis' hidden genocidal empire. For the first time the world saw, in living color, the true scale of the horror. Gas chambers camouflaged as showers, crematoriums still running, and Nazi records so meticulously detailed that no one could deny the extent of the extermination efforts. These records would provide the evidence that would hold the perpetrators accountable. But behind all of this death stood one man whose name would forever be etched in infamy, Eric Muhsfeldt. Born on February 18, 1913, in Norwich, Germany, Eric's life seemed typical for a German citizen of his time. He was the son of a working-class family, attended school, and at 17 became an apprentice baker. But as the Nazi Party rose to power, Eric would soon find his place in their twisted system of terror. 1933 was a pivotal year, the year Adolf Hitler became the Reich Chancellor, ushering in an era of totalitarian control and brutality. Like many others, Muhsfeldt was swept up in the fervor of the regime, joining the SA in that very same year, but he wasn't content to stay there. By 1937, he moved to the SS, and by 1939, he was fully immersed in the Nazi ideology, joining the party and becoming an agent of destruction. The path from baker to mass murderer was quick for Muhsfeldt. By September 1, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, World War II had begun. The outbreak of war was the perfect cover for the Nazis' broader goals. It was during this chaos that Eric was inducted into the SS Totenköpfe, the notorious Death's Head units. These soldiers were tasked with managing concentration camps and overseeing the final solution, the systematic extermination of Jews. In August 1940, Muhsfeldt arrived at Auschwitz, where he was appointed head of the prisoner work squads and a block leader. At Auschwitz, he was exposed to the machinery of mass murder, the logistics of how humans were transported, worked to exhaustion, and then discarded like garbage. The camp's hierarchy rewarded brutality, and Muhsfeldt was quick to rise through the ranks. But Auschwitz was just the beginning of his descent into true evil. His darkest chapter began in November 1941, when he was transferred to Maiden concentration camp as commander of the crematorium operations. It was here that he would oversee one of the most horrific innovations in Nazi death camps, Zyklon B gas chambers. These gas chambers, initially an experiment, were soon used systematically to murder thousands of prisoners deemed unfit for labor. The gassing method was efficient. Prisoners were herded into showers, promised a cleansing, only to be suffocated to death by Zyklon B gas. By late 1943, Maiden had 3 gas chambers. Muhsfeldt oversaw it all, and he reveled in the power he wielded over life and death. By October 1942, the Maiden concentration camp had become one of the most efficient killing machines in Nazi Germany. Under Eric Muhsfeldt's watch, the camp's gas chambers were fully operational, with a steady stream of victims arriving daily. These were not just ordinary prisoners, they were Jews, Romani people, political dissidents, and anyone else the Nazis deemed undesirable. Muhsfeldt, with his cold and calculating demeanor, took great pride in his work. He wasn't just a camp administrator, he was a sadist who relished in the suffering of others. Witnesses reported that he would often pick random victims from the ranks, sending them directly to the gas chambers, sometimes for the most trivial of reasons. His cruel smile was a constant presence as he passed by the condemned, knowing they had no hope of survival. The methods of death at Maiden were as horrific as they were efficient. Prisoners were told they were being taken for showers, their dignity stripped away before they even entered the gas chamber. Once inside, the doors were sealed, and Cyclone B pellets were released through ceiling vents, suffocating the victims in minutes. Some died instantly, while others gasped for air in terror as they choked to death. Eric Muhsfeldt didn't just oversee this process, he took pleasure in it. Survivor accounts tell of him walking into the gas chambers with a cruel, almost gleeful expression, relishing the sight of the prisoners' final moments. He would stand by the chamber doors, watching, listening to their screams, before moving on to his next task, picking out the next group of victims to die. But Muhsfeldt's cruelty didn't stop with the gas chambers. He was notorious for personally selecting prisoners to be tortured or executed. One of his favorite methods was to pick the weakest, the elderly, the children, and order their deaths with no remorse. Children, the most innocent of victims, were his favorite targets. He would walk into the barracks, grab young children by the arm, and drag them to the crematoriums. Once inside, he would order them shot in the back of the head, and sometimes he would just walk away, whistling to himself, as if the deaths of these innocent lives meant nothing. But the horrors of Maiden would reach a terrifying peak with Operation Harvest Festival in October 1943. At Muhsfeldt's direction, Jewish prisoners at Maiden, Poniataba, and Troniki camps were ordered to dig long, deep trenches under the guise of air defense preparations. The prisoners knew what was coming, an execution on a scale the world had never seen before. From November 3rd to 4th, 1943, the largest single-day massacre of Jews during the entire Holocaust took place. Over 43,000 men, women, and children were systematically murdered by the SS. The prisoners were stripped of their clothes, marched to the trenches they had dug, and forced to lie down in the shallow graves. SS soldiers lined the trenches, opened fire with machine guns, and gunned down the helpless victims. For hours, the sound of gunfire and screams filled the air. The SS played music over loudspeakers to drown out the noise. Marching bands, classical symphonies, and even cheerful pop songs masked the massacre as the world's most efficient killing machine went to work. Witnesses recall seeing Muhsfeldt among the gunmen, a smile on his face as he pulled the trigger. It was as if the slaughter was a game to him. Eric Muhsfeldt was not just a camp commander. He was an architect of terror, a man who turned cruelty into a brutal art form. His favorite victims were often the most vulnerable, the elderly, the sick, and above all, children. Survivor accounts paint a chilling picture of his disregard for life and his absolute delight in death. One survivor, Jussi Lang, recalled a particularly haunting scene. Muhsfeldt would walk through the camp, dragging children no older than 8 by the arms, and lead them into the crematorium. The moment he entered, the sound of revolver shots rang out. Then, silence. Muhsfeldt would emerge, sometimes smiling, sometimes whistling, but what was even more horrifying was the fact that on many occasions, Muhsfeldt would make sure that the children's screams were drowned out. SS guards would start the engines of large trucks parked outside the crematorium to mask the sound of the gunshots and cries. The trucks, which were typically used to transport corpses to burial sites in the forest, would roar to life, creating a cacophony to cover the horror within. Yet, despite the relentless death and suffering at Maiden, Muhsfeldt's path of destruction didn't end there. In May 1944, he was transferred back to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where he would supervise the cremation of hundreds of thousands of Hungarian Jews. By then, Auschwitz-Birkenau had become the epicenter of the Nazi extermination machine, and Muhsfeldt was a critical cog in the operation. Here, he did what he did best, causing pain, inflicting terror, and ruthlessly executing anyone in his path. One particularly chilling incident involved a group of young Jewish boys from the Warsaw Ghetto, aged 10 to 14. After being torn from their parents, the boys panicked during roll call and scattered. Once captured, Muhsfeldt's orders were swift and absolute. Every single child was to be sent straight to the gas chambers. His power was absolute, his cruelty limitless. At one point, Dr. Miklo Nisli, a Hungarian Jewish prisoner who had been forced to work as the camp physician, attempted to intervene when Muhsfeldt shot 80 prisoners in cold blood. Muhsfeldt, complaining of a headache, dismissed the suggestion that his actions might be causing stress, snapping at the doctor that it didn't matter whether he killed one person or 80. But what may have been the darkest act of his tenure came after a 16-year-old Jewish girl somehow survived a gas chamber execution. She was discovered among the dead, her survival a freak accident. Nisli, the camp physician, begged Muhsfeldt to allow her medical care, but the request was immediately denied. Instead, Muhsfeldt walked into the room, shot the girl in the back of the neck, and left her body to rot in the chamber. His sadism reached its peak during the Death March of April 1945. As American forces drew closer to Flossenburg, the camp where Muhsfeldt had been stationed, the Nazis began evacuating the prisoners. Exhausted and starved, the prisoners were marched through the snow, with no shelter, no food, and no mercy. Those who collapsed from exhaustion were shot. Muhsfeldt was seen personally executing dozens of these broken prisoners, taking perverse pleasure in their suffering. His reign of terror spanned multiple camps, his hands stained with the blood of countless innocent lives. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, Eric Muhsfeldt was captured by the Allies. In January 1947, he stood trial for his brutal crimes at Flossenburg, where he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. However, the Polish government, fully aware of his atrocities in Poland, demanded his extradition for his crimes at Maiden. The Auschwitz trial began in November 1947, and after hearing the testimonies of survivors and the evidence of his war crimes, the court found Muhsfeldt guilty of crimes against humanity. His sentence was death by hanging. On January 24, 1948, Eric Muhsfeldt was led to the execution chamber at Montelupik prison in Krakow. The method of execution was deliberately chosen to mirror the brutality he had shown his victims. The same hooks he used to hang and burn prisoners in the crematorium were used to execute him. The guards placed him on a wooden stool, fitted a noose around his neck, and attached it to a hook above. Then, they kicked the stool away. But Muhsfeldt didn't die immediately. He struggled, gasping for air, his body convulsing as he hung, taking several agonizing minutes to die. In the ultimate act of symbolic justice, his body was delivered to Jagiellonian University for dissection by medical students. It was a final, fitting tribute to the man who had reveled in torturing and killing so many. His body, like his victims, reduced to a mere subject of study, his memory one of pure evil. After the war, it was reported that Muhsfeldt's wife had died in an Allied bombing raid, and his son was sent to the Russian front, where he presumably perished. In the end, Eric Muhsfeldt left no legacy, only a horrifying record of suffering. His crimes were too heinous for anyone to mourn his passing. There were no tears for him, only the memories of the countless victims he had killed, tortured and burned alive. This is Veil History, where we unearth the stories others won't. If this story moved you, hit the like button to honor the victims. Subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss when we expose the next dark chapter from history. Share this video because these stories must never be forgotten. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next episode, where we continue revealing the darkest truths from history's most terrifying corners.